The glass walls of my flagship store gleamed in the morning sun, casting soft reflections across the polished marble floors. I stood near the display of Italian handbags, my heels clicking lightly as I adjusted one of the gold-plated name tags. The scent of fresh leather and faint notes of jasmine from the boutique candles filled the air, a far cry from the musty little shop I once begged customers to enter. Back then they laughed. They called it a garage sale in disguise. They said I was wasting my time, that no woman with no money, no connections, and no name could ever build something real. I smiled then, even as my chest ached with humiliation. Today, the smile is different. It's the smile of someone who remembers every word and triumphed anyway. My phone buzzed in my silk blouse pocket. I pulled it out and froze. The name flashing on the screen made my throat tighten. Melissa Carter. My cousin. The same one who once told me, "Emily, even a lemonade stand would make more sense than your silly little store." For a second, I stared at the phone, my reflection shimmering faintly in the screen. I could almost hear her laughter from years ago, sharp and dismissive. Only now, she wasn't calling to laugh. She was calling because the world had changed. I had changed. And suddenly, the past I had buried was knocking at my door. I was 21 when I opened that first store. Calling it a store almost feels generous now. It was a tiny strip mall unit on the outskirts of Dallas, wedged between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The paint on the door peeled no matter how many times I brushed over it, and the secondhand shelves wobbled if you leaned too hard. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I had carved out a space that didn't belong to anyone else. My family didn't see it that way. I still remember the Sunday dinner when I told them. The long oak table in my aunt's house, the smell of roasted chicken, my cousins scrolling on their phones while pretending to listen. "You're opening what?" Melissa laughed so loudly, she almost choked on her wine. "A boutique," I said softly, folding my napkin tighter in my lap. "A boutique." My Uncle Richard snorted. "Honey, boutiques are for people with money. You don't even have health insurance." Heat rushed to my cheeks. My mother stared down at her plate, saying nothing. My father cleared his throat like he wanted to defend me, but the words never came. I sat there, hands trembling, forcing myself to swallow against the lump in my throat. Later that night, I cried in the back room of the store while unpacking a box of thrifted scarves I planned to resell. My tears landed on the silky fabric, leaving darker patches that faded as they dried. That's when I heard the little bell above the door. It was my grandmother, Clara. She walked in slowly, her cane tapping against the floor, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun. She didn't laugh. She didn't sigh. She just looked around and smiled. "This place smells like dreams," she said. Then she slipped a small silver bracelet off her wrist and placed it in my palm. The charm on it was a tiny star. "Wear this, Emily. And remember, every empire starts small. Don't let them tell you otherwise." Her words sank into me like sunlight through a window. That night, I decided. I would not quit. No matter how loud their laughter echoed, I would find a way forward. And with that bracelet on my wrist, I stepped fully into independence. The early months were brutal. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, packed my old Toyota Corolla with boxes of merchandise, and drove to the store with coffee so bitter it made my stomach turn. I'd sweep the floors, rearrange displays, and pray that someone would walk in. Some days, not a single customer came. I'd sit behind the counter with my ledger open, pretending to write numbers just so I wouldn't feel like a failure. But I learned quickly. When people turned away from my dusty window, I'd chase them with a smile, offering a discount. When they laughed at my thrifted scarves, I saved every dollar until I could buy higher quality stock. And when sales were slow, I worked evenings at a diner to keep the lights on. My hands smelled like grease and fabric softener, but they were the hands of a fighter. Then one afternoon, a woman named Diane walked in. She was tall, confident, carrying herself like she owned the city. She picked up one of my scarves and asked, "Who designed this display?" "I did," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She studied me for a long moment before nodding. "You've got an eye for detail." Ever thought about expanding beyond scarves? Diane became my first mentor. She ran a mid-sized fashion business in Dallas and, instead of brushing me off, she took me under her wing. She taught me how to source better products, negotiate with suppliers, and most importantly, believe that my vision mattered. She didn't hand me success, but she gave me the tools to build it. The grind never disappeared, but slowly, small wins began stacking up. My first loyal customer, a young teacher named Rachel, came back 3 times in 1 week and told her coworkers about me. I still remember the rush of adrenaline when I deposited my first week of profit into the bank, $162. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Months turned into years. I learned how to reinvest instead of splurging, how to make every penny work twice as hard. I stopped posting vague, working hard, updates on social media because I didn't want my family knowing the details. At holiday dinners, when Melissa asked, "How's that little store of yours?" I'd just smile and say, "It's fine." Meanwhile, behind the curtain, it was more than fine. I was growing. First, I added handbags, then shoes. Eventually, I moved into a bigger unit with actual branding and a sign that gleamed at night. Each step felt impossible, until it wasn't. The bracelet never left my wrist. Every time I doubted myself, I touched the tiny star and heard my grandmother's voice. Every empire starts small. And so, piece by piece, quietly, my empire began to rise. The grand opening of my flagship franchise store was meant to be just another milestone, another quiet victory I would savor without needing anyone's approval. But fate has a strange sense of humor. Word travels fast, especially in family circles. By the time the invitations went out to partners, designers, and local press, I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up too. And they did. I was standing near the entrance, greeting a small crowd of guests, when I saw Melissa walk through the glass doors. She wasn't alone. My Uncle Richard followed, his face already half-twisted in skepticism, and behind them came my parents, looking nervous, as if they weren't sure whether to be proud or embarrassed. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Melissa's eyes darted across the space, widening as she took in the details. The high ceilings, the glittering chandeliers, the sleek marble checkout counter. On the walls hung framed magazine covers featuring me, Forbes Local Visionaries, Dallas Luxury Living, even a spread in a national style magazine. Staff in tailored black uniforms moved with precision, offering champagne to guests. This is yours?" Melissa whispered, her voice trailing off as though the words got stuck in her throat. I let the silence stretch. I wanted her to feel it, the weight of everything she once mocked now towering around her. "Yes," I said finally, my tone calm, but edged with something stronger. "This is mine." Uncle Richard coughed awkwardly, his eyes landing on a display of handbags priced higher than his monthly mortgage. "You mean you actually own this place?" "Not just this," I corrected, stepping forward. "This is one of 12. My franchise now spans across Texas, with new locations opening in Chicago and Los Angeles this year." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father blinked hard, as if trying to compute the numbers. And Melissa, she looked pale, her smirk long gone, her jaw slack. I guided them deeper into the store, past the private VIP room lined with velvet seating and custom mirrors. Guests mingled nearby, toasting my success as though I'd always belonged in this world. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You laughed at me," I said softly, almost conversationally, as my fingers brushed the bracelet on my wrist. "When I sat at that dinner table years ago and told you I was opening a boutique, you couldn't stop mocking me. You called it a waste of time. A joke. Do you remember that?" Melissa's lips trembled, but no words came out. "I remember," I continued. "I remember every laugh, every dismissal. And I also remember deciding, that very night, that your laughter would fuel me, not stop me." The silence grew heavier. Around us, the chatter of other guests seemed to fade into a low hum. For once, they weren't the ones in control. I was. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Emily, I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, I said, not unkindly but firmly. And that's okay. I don't need apologies. What I need is for you to see me now. All of me. Because the little store you dismissed? I smiled faintly. It's now a luxury franchise. Their faces told the rest of the story. Melissa's pride crumbled into shame. Richard looked like he'd swallowed a stone. My mother's eyes filled with tears she couldn't quite hide. And me? I stood tall, calm, unshaken. The girl who once cried into thrifted scarves was gone. In her place stood the woman who built an empire from scratch. The thing about power is it doesn't roar. It whispers. It waits. And in that boutique, filled with the soft glow of chandeliers and the rustle of designer fabrics, I realized just how much power I had. Not the kind that crushes people, but the kind that decides who gets a second chance and who doesn't. Melissa finally broke the silence. Emily, I didn't know it would become this. I mean, look at this place. She gestured helplessly around her, eyes glossy. I shouldn't have laughed at you back then. I was young, stupid. But maybe, she hesitated, biting her lip. Maybe there's a way we could work together now? I've been thinking about starting something of my own. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Years ago, she had mocked me for daring to dream. Now she was asking to stand in my shadow. If you want to work with me, I said slowly, measuring each word, you'll start where I did. At the bottom. Folding scarves. Greeting customers. Learning what it means to actually build something instead of ridiculing it. That's the only way. Her face twisted. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. I tilted my head. Think of it as a test of humility. If you can't respect the ground floor, you don't deserve the top floor. Uncle Richard cleared his throat. Well, Emily, I could help you expand financially. I have connections. I cut him off gently, but firmly. Richard, this company doesn't need your money. What it needs is for you to stop treating women's ambitions like their hobbies. You once told me I didn't even have enough sense to run a lemonade stand. So here's my condition. Before you ever speak to me about business, show me you can speak respectfully about women. Not just me, all of us. His cheeks flushed a deep red. Then my father, his voice low. Emily, I wish I had defended you more back then. I failed you. If there's any way I can make it right. I softened, my chest tightening. Dad, I don't want money or apologies. I want you to believe in me without needing proof first. That's my condition. Not for business, for us. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I turned back to all of them, standing beneath the glow of my success. I'm not here to punish anyone, but I will never shrink again to make others comfortable. If you want a place in my world, there are rules, growth, humility, respect. Without those, you'll stay on the outside looking in. For the first time in years, they listened, truly listened. And I realized the laughter that once haunted me had finally been silenced, replaced by something far more powerful, respect, however reluctant. The days that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because business slowed, if anything, the franchise was busier than ever, but because the noise that had lived in my head for years was finally gone. Their laughter, their doubts, the sting of rejection, all of it had been replaced by something steadier, something lighter. Melissa showed up at the store 2 weeks later. No makeup, no designer heels, just jeans and a plain shirt. She asked if the entry-level position was still open. I nodded and handed her a folded apron. Her face flushed, but she slipped it over her head without another word. Watching her greet her first customer, awkward but sincere, wasn't revenge. It was proof. Proof that people can change if they're willing to humble themselves. Uncle Richard didn't rush back, but I heard from my aunt that he'd stopped mocking his secretary for dreaming too big. My father called me every Sunday now, not to give advice, but just to listen. And my mother, for the first time in my adult life, walked into one of my stores with her chin high, telling the staff proudly, "I'm Emily Carter's mom." One evening, after closing time, I sat alone in my office. The walls were lined with sketches of new designs, expansion maps, and photos from the grand opening. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the silver bracelet. Its tiny star charm glinted under the desk lamp, just as it had all those years ago when my grandmother pressed it into my hand. Her words returned to me, soft but steady. Every empire starts small. I smiled, slipping the bracelet back onto my wrist. She had been right. What began as a shaky little boutique in a strip mall had grown into something vast, something undeniable. I rose, walking toward the glass wall of my office. Outside, the city lights stretched across the horizon, glittering like 1,000 tiny stars. My reflection stared back at me, no longer the girl who begged for validation, but the woman who created her own crown. And in that moment, with a calm pride that filled every corner of me, I whispered the words that carried the weight of my entire journey. They laughed at my first store, but now it's a luxury franchise.